Since the start of his second term as Minnesota U.S. Attorney, Andy Lugar has generated big headlines. From his takedown of the largest COVID fraud ring in the country last year to the massive Minneapolis gang bust announced last month. As the state's top federal prosecutor, the range of crimes his office is responsible for is wide. But Mr. Lugar has decided to focus the considerable resources of his office on fighting violent crime. I recently sat down with him to talk about why he felt the federal government needed to step in such an unprecedented way and whether or not his approach is working. This is Andy Lugar's second turn as Minnesota U.S. Attorney. The first time he sat in this seat, he was appointed by President Barack Obama. That term ended in 2017 when Donald Trump entered the White House. When Joe Biden became president, Lugar threw his hat in the ring once again and was sworn in as Minnesota's top federal prosecutor for the second time in March 2022. So you're in the same office now.
I am. Same desk, same chair, same computers, everything.
But the state, he says, has changed dramatically.
People ask me, Julie, if, is it different than the first time? And it really is.
And what is the number one difference?
Violent crime. In the 5 years that I was gone, we as a society have come up with far more destructive ways to kill each other. Fentanyl being one. And the proliferation of automatic weapons through these switches or auto sears, as they're called, that didn't exist before, and that's changed the game.
Add to that, he says, everything we went through in the last 5 years, from the pandemic closing down the courts, the riots following George Floyd's murder, and the severe shortage of police officers that followed. All of it, he says, caused gang activity to explode.
There grew a sense, and I'm not saying this because it's what I think, it's what people we prosecute tell us, is that there came to be a sense that there weren't consequences or there weren't severe enough consequences.
That is why he says he made the unprecedented decision to use the considerable power and resources of his federal office to prosecute crimes normally handled at the state level.
We decided, we being law enforcement, myself and others, that we needed to step in a big way, in a way that this office hasn't done before, certainly wasn't doing when I was U.S. Attorney last time, but that this had to be our focus, both to change the narrative on the streets and to show people we meant business.
Well, the FBI took
the first sign he meant business came in early May when Lugar announced a massive gang bust. Using the federal RICO Act, normally used to prosecute organized crime in mafia cases, to indict more than 40 alleged gang members.
The indictments unsealed today allege that the defendants engaged in a brutal and unrelenting trail of violence.
His office now also prosecutes carjacking cases, something unheard of in his first term.
I never once heard the term carjacking. 2021, 650 carjackings in Minneapolis alone. So we went from 0 to 600 overnight. That forced us to become a U.S. Attorney's office and a city that focused on it.
And Lugar says he wants criminals to understand when they are tried for a crime in federal court, the consequences are drastically different than state court.
So you don't have a constitutional right to bail in the federal system. And if you're involved in a violent crime, chances are you're not going to be released. We catch. There's no release. And we don't have parole. So if you get sentenced to a 10-year mandatory minimum for having a switch or having a weapon, you're going to do the time. You're going to do it somewhere else.
And do you think that message is getting through?
They tell me it is. The people on the streets are telling us loud and clear that it is.
Lugar's decision to aggressively fight crime at the federal level has won him the admiration of many who felt state and local leaders were too soft on crime for too long. Is there no truth in that?
Here's what I say at dinner parties. And I get invited to fewer and fewer dinner parties because I just tell people what I think the truth is.
Yeah.
I think we look for simple solutions to really complex problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so violent crime is complex. Anybody who reduces the criminal justice system to a bumper sticker isn't being honest. There's no catchphrase, tough on crime, soft on crime. Nobody's got a magic solution. You try things, not everything works, but we got to try.
Lugar says it will take about 2 years to see if what he's trying is working. Where do you think we'll be at the end of your second term?
I'd like to believe, and it's my passion, that we can be the Minneapolis and the Minnesota that we were before the pandemic. Violent crime was not something people were talking about. I want us to be back there. If that goes away, that's the reason I'm here, and that would be an amazing legacy to leave with this whole office, making our part of that difference.
One more note, while the rise in violent crime committed by juveniles is alarming, Lugar's office only prosecute crimes committed by those 18 and up.